They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations, pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
And boom. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Jim jumps in at the last possible second. I love it.
Wow.
I love it. Hey, guys, did you miss us? We were gone for an entire week. I think I got like 20 texts. I think I had like 20 texts that said, like, hey, what happened? The podcast didn't post an episode. I was like, yes. There was no episode. I took a vacation. Like, leave me alone for a minute. It's okay. I'm allowed to do that.
Do that?
Yeah. Hey, Jim, it's I got a local recording not started. Please ask your guests to refresh their browser. So we'll just troubleshoot live. Just bear with us for a second. Jim, hit the refresh button on your browser.
Oh man. And here I was saying Chuck Norris says Jim can stay, and now Chuck Norris just gave him the thumbs down. He's out.
No, we'll get Jim back in a second.
That's what he gets for showing up late.
Yeah, just reminds the way he snuck in there. It reminds me of dodgeball, where LaFleur shows up at the very end, and they have to put the vote to let him play.
I give him a thumbs up. I like it. Jim can stay. All right. Like I said, we're back. I promise not to take any more long vacations in the next couple of weeks, so you'll have at least a couple more episodes of us. I'm welcoming my longtime good friend, the man from the Mile High City, Mr. Sam Masiello. Welcome, Sam. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me back again. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. So I figured, we'd call this given that we're coming back off of a break. I didn't have a whole ton of time to do a massive amount of prep work for this podcast, frankly. So, Sam, what's on your mind? This is like the Jerry Seinfeld episode. It's an episode about nothing, but I've never had a boring episode when we do this. So let's go.
Wow. What's on my mind? Lots of stuff on my mind. I guess I'd be remiss to not use the term AI at some point during this discussion.
Oh, no.
Did Raph just spit his drink out? I think he did.
2 minutes and 23 seconds, Sam.
Put a coin in the jar.
23 seconds.
There you go. Gee, aside from that, there's nothing going on in the world, is there? Everything's boring. Nothing's happening right now. Nothing in the geopolitical landscape. Nothing in.
Well, I just reposted a friend of the pod, Kareem Hijazi, over at his new gig. Has put up a few a new posts off of Vigilosity. If you guys pay attention, like the amount of activity coming from Iran has been like up to the top of the chart, and people are like, well, what's going on now? And I really want to reply to all those people. Really? Or you're trolling, right? Like,
yeah.
Really?
How big is that rock you're living under?
Do you get cable down there? Yeah, there's some geopolitics stuff going on. I don't imagine this makes your job as a security leader in a large company easy when these geopolitics things go on fire randomly.
Yeah, I mean, especially since we own a fairly influential newspaper in the Washington D.C. area as well, so that certainly does not help matters. I mean, that particular company has its own set of issues on a regular basis just because of the things that they write about, and it obviously doesn't get much better when you have situations like we have right now.
Yeah, does that? Although I've always wondered, right? So your day to day. Like, you're defending against nation states, you're defending against the accidental, whoops, I wasn't supposed to do that. And then the run-of-the-mill regular attacks, right? Like, new nation state activity comes out, like, do you do anything differently, or is it just vigil? Like the fact that, okay, yeah, the Iranians are back at it. Like, okay, I mean,
yeah, I'd say there's certainly an increased level of diligence, but I wouldn't necessarily say that we're doing anything differently.
Yeah,
I mean, there's certainly awareness, right? That certain events can cause certain things to happen, or that may cause an increase in activity of certain kinds. But at the end of the day, right, we still have our jobs to do every day.
Yeah,
and so as long as we do our jobs and monitor the things we're supposed to monitor, we respond to things as they happen. We're not going to start doing a bunch of things without necessarily having a reason to do them.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I've always wondered, like, because it used to be that if you're not, like your security posture was at baseline X, but if you found out like, hey, the Chinese are coming for your intellectual property, you'd be like, oh, okay, well, I can adjust things and move things. But I think we live in a world where like hypervigilance is just sort of the norm. Bullets whiz by your head every day. Right. And it's not like you're going to suddenly go, whew, okay, the Iranians are done. Well, let me turn off all that equipment for a minute. Like, that's not going to happen.
Right. Well, and even if there is increased awareness around certain types of activity because of some geopolitical events, it doesn't mean you're suddenly going to go from a maturity level of this to this overnight, right? You still have fair. What you have in place. You're still doing the things you're going to do. But you may want to pay a little extra special attention to certain types of things in the environment that don't necessarily look normal, but you do that anyway. So yeah. You kind of are where you are. You kind of you're the person that you are. And you're the program that you are, and so you're not going to change that overnight or significantly increase what you're able to do overnight just because of some new threat.
It's amazing too, because you think about it, is how much energy is put into identifying threats and looking what threats are doing, and analysis of threat activities, and whether it be the MITRE ATT&CK framework as an example has always defined, which is awesome. It's great, and this information is great to have, but it's hard to put it into action, right? Let's call it outside of your normal rhythm where you do that, right? So if something pops up, it just kind of like Raph said, you're just gonna keep doing what you're doing, and just like you said, you're at that level that you're going to be at.
Yeah, and depending on what industry you're in, if there's a certain threat actor group that goes after certain industries, you may be paying a little special attention to the fact that group came back online. But at the same time, again, you're not going to be doing much different than what you're already doing. You still monitor the things you're supposed to monitor and look out for the things you're supposed to be looking out for and respond to the things you need to respond to.
Well, and how do you do a ton different? I mean, anybody that's worked in a corporate environment knows any change takes months to start swinging forward. I mean, just because all of a sudden there's a new attack coming from Iranian attackers, somebody's not just like, oh, you know what? We don't have MFA. Let's go ahead and enable that for this. Right. Yeah. By the time you get it done, it's over. You missed that boat. Yeah. There's no time to implement new features, really. It's really much more of a, hey, what are people talking? What are they doing? And like you said, the diligence of, okay, maybe we're paying a little bit closer attention to these type of events, but you're not implementing new technologies in the time that somebody said, hey, there's some new event coming on.
Exactly.
Let's take a quick break.
Should I be excited or afraid of AI? The answer is yes. It's both.
Things are going to look so different in the next couple of years. You will not be ready for the disruptions that are going to come.
I'm Jeff Nielsen, host of Digital Disruption, the go-to podcast for technology leaders. Our generation's conflict, I think, is going to be emotional, not economic. The companies that are going to win are the ones that have a couple of characteristics. Stay ahead of the curve with Digital Disruption. Available now on your favorite podcast platform.
It's an amazing statement, though, right? Don't you think? Right, think about that for a second. Right, you spend so much time looking at different things, and when you say, "Oh, this is a new like take Kev or some of these other things that are out there," you're either gonna incorporate that into your rhythm over a period of time. It's your ability to react to these giant moving parts, or it's not realistic. It's just not realistic.
I think that's where, and I'm gonna make myself slightly odds are out of favor with my fellow vendors. I think that's where vendors really get, at least some of them really get kind of the Chicken Little effect is, like something new is happening. Like you must do something different. And when reality is, again, like if you find out there's a tornado a half a mile away, you're not suddenly going to, like, you'll maybe run or hide, right? Protect your family. But you're not suddenly going to go, I really should reinforce the outside of the house. Like, that's not a thing. You're not going to do that. Like,
you're not digging out your tornado cellar to go hide in when it's a half a mile away, Raph.
Listen, I go hide in my bunker because I don't have one. But
it's an interesting thing, though. I mean, to think about that, because how often in security we treat the knee-jerk reaction. Something's happening. All of a sudden, you have to do this. But, I mean, in reality, like I just said, you're not implementing anything like that.
Right.
In any quick fashion, right? Yep. Oh, we got to do this. Yeah, that's a 6-month project. We're not we're not just dumping in and all of a sudden having MFA everywhere or, shutting off SSH access to the public out of nowhere. Like there's a process that goes through to be able to do something like that.
Well, I think that's a great analogy, though, that you just made, Raph, about the tornado being a half mile away, right? Because you're not going to be able to board up the windows and do all the things that you would normally do in any sort of, situation where you had the opportunity to plan. It's too late by then, right? You're either prepared or you're not. And you'll either have an issue or you won't, right? You'll either get compromised or you won't. And it all depends on, your level of preparedness before you get into it. I've never been a fan of, like, back in the day, it was all about prevention, right? Yeah. And it was all about how you protect your network and keep the bad guys out. And then it seemed to swing all the way over to detection, where we're basically just giving up and saying, well, they're going to get in our network anyway, so let's just figure out how we can find them quickly. Where the answer was really always somewhere in the middle, right? How do you do a good job of preventing the things you need to prevent, understanding that somebody who is extremely motivated or someone who has a lot of resources at their disposal is going to find a way to get in. So how do you, in those situations, find those people and root them out relatively quickly, so you're balancing between the ability to be able to prevent while also the ability to detect when something does happen? So,
and I was just down in Florida, one of my favorite locations down in Tampa, St. Pete area, for some vacay. And this reminds me of like some houses that you drive by that have been decimated by the last hurricane. You're like, that's unfortunate. But you can see that it was clearly not set up to be protected quickly. Mm-hmm. And some of the new ones that have been built and they're still standing, people are living in right now, they have this, like the outside, the windows, there's hinges. We can just quickly drop a protective covering. I don't know if it's plywood or whatever it is, but something you just and they close really fast. It takes an hour to do the whole house of all the windows. There are things you can do. And I was talking to a guy that was gassing his boat at the same time as we were there. And he's like, some of us have just learned that the time the hurricane is announced is too late. At that point, you just leave and hope that your stuff is here when you come back. Mm-hmm. Because if you really want your stuff, like if you really want to save your house, you build this in either A, when you're building the house, sound familiar to anybody? Or B, retrofit it like after the last hurricane goes by. You're like, okay, so what did we learn here, folks? Mm-hmm. We learned that kind of design and that type of window covering and this, like those work. That other stuff doesn't work. Let's throw that away and try something different. Perfect.
Secure by design, Raph?
What?
Is that what you did you say secure by design? Is that
Put a coin in the jar.
Yeah. It wasn't AI.
We got AI. I'm just waiting for the ZT comment next.
No, don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
But if you had, no. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that's the best. As much as I hate saying it, like the things that CISOs that I think really get it, and the people that run, it's not just CISOs, people that really run good security programs, whether it's a detection engineering team, whether it's a SOC, whether it's a response team, whatever, they are the ones that are the best. I think that the thing that distinguishes them from everybody else is they read breach reports and response and recovery reports like it's tomorrow's lottery tickets, right? Mm-hmm. Like they read those and go, what can I learn from this that they did not? And then you apply that, and that's the only way to survive, because attackers don't do the same thing twice unless it works, in which case, like, seriously, we should be learning from the past. I don't know.
Well, you do get some of that though, right, Raph? I mean, you get the hacktivists that pop out and they start doing DDoS attacks or something like that. Hopefully you've already learned from this and you've set up defenses that DDoS attacks are no longer, like, okay, uptick in DDoS attacks, whoop-de-doo, right? Like you've learned from that. The ones that go try to repeat those fall on deaf ears, basically. And like, all right, I'm protected from this. And now you're worried about more of it's the stuff we can't easily do. It is the one-offs. It's the true nation state stuff that I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm. So this is one for Sam then, right? So this maybe shows how far disconnected I am from the everyday block and tackle of cyber. But like, Sam, how many novel ways to breach a company are there, right? It's not like every day somebody goes, holy cow, we've never heard of such an attack before.
Yeah, that's pretty rare. That's pretty rare at this point, right? I mean, those kinds of incidents are pretty few and far between. And quite frankly, most of the guys who are out there today that are looking for opportunities to breach someone's company or get access to their data, it's targets of opportunity, right? Yeah. These aren't necessarily, most of the time, attacks where the attacker has any sort of significant or any knowledge of your systems or network. They're just out there doing scans. They're out there sending phishing emails and just trying to see what they can get. Right. And they find the targets of opportunity where they find the weak spots where, they find something that's easy to exploit. They find a person who's easy to exploit and they find their way in from there and kind of work their way around. I mean, it's pretty rare that the breach reports that you're seeing nowadays are from some sophisticated nation state actor who found some, particular way to get into a very particular application that some companies running on their systems or network, and they found a way to get into that system, and then they started moving laterally within the network from there. I mean, that stuff does happen, but it is such a small piece of the entire pie when you think about the breaches that happen on a regular basis. 99.9+% of these attacks are occurring because companies are targets of opportunity and nothing more.
Oh, but even those, Sam, right? I think even those that are like, oh, hey, that's a novel way to break into X application. It isn't like they've discovered a new method. It's RCE or a buffer overflow or cross-site scripting or SQL injection in a different app or in a slightly different format. It's not like somebody's inventing entirely new methods of exploit.
Well, but a lot of times these very targeted attacks, the ones that are on the very, very small end of the scale, these are very specific to individual applications that some companies are running internally within their companies, right? So it isn't even necessarily something that could even be applicable to another company in some cases, right? Where it's specifically targeted towards exactly what that company runs, the version of that application, how they run it, how they have it configured, which usually ends up requiring a heck of a lot of time and reconnaissance, right? A lot of these spray and pray types of attacks that you see on a day-to-day basis, right? There's no recon that's going into any of that. There's no pre-knowledge of anything that happens in a particular organization. They don't even know where they're targeting most of the time. But the ones that are truly targeted, the ones that are truly custom in some cases towards individual organizations, are ones that take months, if not years, of reconnaissance in order to actually breach their systems. But that's when you have the breaches at companies like Google's and the Microsofts and things like that, right? Yeah. They're the ones that where the cyber criminals are taking the time to do all of that reconnaissance and understand, possibly even breach somebody internally, right? So they have somebody on the inside who's helping them as well, feeding them information that they need to know in order to be able to do that recon. But that's, such a small percentage of what actually happens in the real world. Most of it is really, a vast majority of it is just, again, targets of opportunity where the attacker doesn't even know what he's got or who he's compromised until he decides to start taking a look at the mountain of data that he has.
Yeah, I think that brings me to the question of you mentioned security program maturity at the beginning. It's something I've thought a lot about, right? And I'm maturity models and modeling any particular part of your security program or usage of any particular technology or process. I think that now that we are 35, Jim, 35 years? Guys, 35 years? Are we 35 years in ish? Since we were like a real grown up boy, so it's Pinocchio turned into a real child and we became a cyber thing. or information security or security or whatever. I mean, we're getting close to that, right? We've got to be close to 35 years. I feel like we're finally getting to a point where, I don't know, where it's not just like everybody building something different. Everybody's starting from a different place. Everybody is unique, right? Sam, you guys in the CISO community, there's got to be like, here's what the baseline looks like now. Here's what a template for this kind of company looks like now.
Yes, I would agree with that. So in our company, right, we own a fairly large portfolio of organizations that range from very small to very large.
Yeah.
And so the things that those companies are thinking about on a day-to-day basis relative to their threat profile, their threat landscape, how they potentially could get compromised, really does vary quite a bit from a larger programmatic scale, right? Because on one end, we have companies that have lots of PII data, lots of consumer data, lots of privacy regulations that they fall under. So lots of eyeballs that are looking in the event that something were to go wrong. On the smaller end of the scale, we have companies that, while they protect some very important intellectual property, they don't have nearly the number of eyeballs on them from a regulatory perspective, or from a threat perspective, cyber criminals that may be looking at them specifically as a company they may want to target. But to your point, there are a number of things that, regardless of whether you're building a large program or a small program at a different scale, there still are some very foundational things that you need to be thinking about and doing from a cyber program perspective in order to at least be doing the basics right. From there may be other conversations you need to have internally as to whether or not we care about, certain other technologies. I'll just, since Jim mentioned it, I'll just throw ZTNA out there, right?
Oh man, he got it.
Just because it feels like that's the bingo card for the podcast. So I'm trying to make sure we get a coverall for the bingo card.
Full house.
Yeah. So some companies may be thinking about that, where for others they're like, we don't care about that, right? Most of our data is on Box and it's in Microsoft 365. And so we don't really care about the rest of that stuff. So from a foundational standpoint, when you think about things like password managers, MFA, like the real basic table stakes, people really should have licked by now. Although I would say that that isn't always necessarily the case. Look at it, right? A lot of the reason that companies are still getting compromised today is because of basic failures. They're not getting compromised because of some, like we were talking about earlier, some complex attack or some, something that takes 4 or 5 stages in order to get into some company. They're happening because of failures at the basic level. And so while it's nice to think about and talk about all of the, neat, cool whiz bang things that you see at RSA and Black Hat that the vendors are all doing, that's all this cool, all this cool technology and all this new ways to incorporate automation into what they're building. At the end of the day, the foundational stuff is still where we're not doing it right and we're not doing it well.
I got it, Sam. A follow up on that is you have an interesting perspective because you have a broad spectrum of companies that you're clearly overseeing from a security perspective. Not only are you saying that there's a baseline that applies to anybody doing anything, right? Mm-hmm. But you also kind of brought up this is a very compliance driven company. This is maybe a threat driven kind of scenario. Mm-hmm. Do you see that? Do you see where there's even like channels of baselines? Like, so, hey, I'm a credit card processing company. I got these foundation points and these are the 10 things that that every company of this type is a manufacturing company. So you can take that playbook to any manufacturing company. Have we made it that far down the cybersecurity path of commonality? I think a little bit maybe where Raf was going. Is it possible? Do you think you could have a manufacturer playbook?
So I've worked at large online retail companies. I've worked at manufacturing companies. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the basic playbook around, like when you come into an organization, right? The basic playbook around risk assessments, knowing what you have, knowing what you don't have, what are the things that are most important to the organization? How is that stuff protected? Where is that information? Like all that basic discovery stuff that one does when they first go into an organization is pretty common, right? But then once you get beyond that, the environments start to diverge pretty quickly. When you look at manufacturing, to use your example, right? There's probably lots of OT in addition to the IT environment that you need to make sure you're looking at as well, because there's things that are sitting out in a field somewhere, maybe in an oil rig or maybe at a manufacturing site that's in the middle of nowhere, because most manufacturing sites aren't necessarily in major metropolitan areas. They're often some podunk town somewhere where they actually employ like the entire town at that manufacturing facility, right? So there's lots of things you need to be thinking about relative to manufacturing that is very different than what you might think about when you go into a retail organization, for example, or one that sells tickets, or one that is publishing a newspaper, or right. So that, again, those basic things around the discovery aspect of the job is portable. But then once you get beyond that, all of the other pieces that surround understanding what your risk is, where your risk is, where your data is, how that data is protected, what data you have, all that stuff starts to diverge, at least from a conceptual perspective, relatively quickly. Or a practical perspective, I should say. Conceptually, it's the concept is the same, but from a practical implementation perspective is where it's like.
I think. Do we see a lot of people fall back on though, like regulatory or, I take credit cards, so I'm falling to PCI, health, I'm high trust, all these different things. Like that's where people go, but they're so broad. It's hard really to get a baseline.
They are the bare minimum standard. Right? They should, just because somebody can say, well, I was PCI compliant, that doesn't necessarily mean you're secure by any means of the imagination. It is barely the minimum baseline that one should be looking at when they're looking at the maturity of their program and the things that they should be doing to protect whatever data that they're responsible for protecting. And it's assuming that your compliance regulations is your aspirational standard is a pretty easy way to end up on the wrong end of a one-way conversation with HR and your boss. So I think but to the point, James, though, I think people rely on those standards too often as being what they should be doing, when in fact it's barely, if not even, maybe not even the minimum, right? But it's the things that particular standards body requires you to have in place for you to be able to take credit cards, for example, or to do business in a certain sector. But that by no means means that you are doing the things that you should be doing from a practical perspective. What is considered reasonable when running a security program and protecting the type of information you need to protect. If you're relying on those compliance standards to be your roadmap and your shining star, that you're not going to last long.
Well, and they could be misleading too, right? I mean, not everything. We say they're the baseline standards, but I wouldn't even say everything in any given one of those is something that I should require to have in my system, right? Like, okay, I'm following PCI, but is everything in there what I should be putting my focus on to get to that level before I start moving on? Or there's probably a ton of things outside of PCI that I should be doing before I should be even doing half of the stuff that's in PCI.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And there's a lot of, I'll just say, finessing of conversations that goes on with the auditors that come in, right? To make them believe that you're doing certain things that you're not actually doing, right? So, I mean, not only do you have something that's not even really considered a baseline minimum standard, and you're going below that.
And scope, let's not forget scope, right? We can PCI scope a iPhone.
I think if you're playing the DtSR, you know what? That's it. I've decided we're gonna make bingo cards. I'm gonna make some bingo cards, because if there was one for this show, somebody would have had bingo by now, because you guys are killing me with this.
We're hammering it home.
I come back from vacation and like, good Lord, what is happening? We lost the plot. No, but I like it. This is a good conversation.
I think the lowest rated episode of all of them.
Yeah. I think this is great, because it just reminds me that as old as this industry is, and young by every other department standards, but as old as we feel, age does not imply maturity, as my my professor used to say in class, and I think that goes for security programs too.
Oh, for sure. And you think about some of the companies that have been around for a while, right? The older companies, a lot of them have grown a lot through acquisition. They have very heterogeneous environments. They have systems that have never been connected, right? So you think about the complexity of those types of environments, and the job of the CISO and the security team to understand where all the data lives. That might even just be on the network, much less all the data that's now being put into cloud environments where somebody in the marketing department has a credit card and can go out and just purchase whatever tool or system they want without necessarily involving the IT organization, and sticking data out into these cloud environments too. And so getting your arms around all this information is hard, right? And I'm not trying to sound defeatist about it, but it makes the challenge of the CISO and the security teams extremely difficult because of the fact that regardless of where this data is, it's part of our responsibility to make sure that we are helping to protect it. It's not just the stuff that's within the four walls of the headquarters building or what's encapsulated within the LAN. It's everything that exists everywhere. And in environments where employees are empowered to do the things that they feel that they need to do in order to be as productive as possible, which includes, I'll say it again, AI tools, right? Where people are just trying to do the right, they're trying to be productive and trying to do the right thing, not necessarily understanding the risks of using those environments and putting the data that they are putting into those environments. And that's not just AI tools, that's anything that's in the cloud at this point.
We see that with a lot of the new tools. I just saw something on LinkedIn that I haven't really looked into it, but they was talking about like Adobe Reader by default is starting to have like AI enabled, and it's going to, send everything to the cloud. And, I haven't, like I said, I haven't verified this, but if that's the case, and I think we see this with some of the newer stuff, like everybody's doing this now. They're sending stuff to the cloud. I mean, even people that don't know that they're doing it, like the tool just by default changed on the next update, and now all the stuff's going out. And so security trying to stay on top of all the changes of all the software that exists outside of even just the Microsoft tools, but anything else, right? Doesn't matter what you're using, trying to stay on top of all that IT to be able to know, oh, hey, they just changed the defaults to this. Now stuff's going up, or, anything like that is a huge challenge. Never mind just know where everything is.
Yeah. And what it is, right? So we're talking about some of the foundational stuff earlier. To me, one of the foundational elements of building a good security program is data classification. How do I, it's one thing to just say we have data here, there, and everywhere, but how much of that data do you care about? Like what of that information do you care about? If it's something that's fairly innocuous and something that isn't necessarily going to cause a newspaper headline if it were to get compromised, maybe you don't care about it as much as something else, but you don't know how to answer that question unless you know what that data is and where it is. And so to me, while it's a huge, big, ugly, hairy beast that nobody really likes to talk about, data classification is an extremely important underpinning to building pretty much everything else in your program, right? There's a lot of things I call data classification the gateway drug into other things like DLP, data retention, because unless you can do data classification well, you can't do those other things well. People have spent hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars on DLP tools that they just expected to go out and do the magic and do the thing when it had no idea what data it was even working with. And so you have things that turn into bad investments or what appear to be bad investments, but because you didn't do the pre-work that was required to actually make that tool work the way it's supposed to.
You can buy a DLP box, but the data classification, all joking aside, I think that's where AI can have a huge advantage is in data classification. So I did it. I set it, coin in the jar, but but I actually tend to agree with you I always felt that data classification is where, that's the roots of the tree, but it's so hard. It's easier to try to buy the box and the technology to block it because I can say, well, I don't really know classification, but I know I don't want credit cards or social security numbers or account numbers to go out, right? That kind of thing. So it kind of comes into that, not to bring up the word maturity again, but it kind of goes into like, how are we going to keep moving the ball down the field in such a way? But I would almost argue it's just now technology is getting to the point where it helps you do data classification because data is constantly moving around, changing and stuff like that. But I think that's couldn't possibly agree more.
I think the only answer to data classification is removing the human from that workflow, because except for at some validation step towards the end and perhaps into a training or supervisory aspect at the very beginning, because that middle part where it's actually doing work, like we can't be involved in that. There's hundreds of thousands of hell. You know what? I opened up my shared drive the other day, and I've been at this company for now just a little bit over 3 years, and I'm like, what the hell are these? When did I make this directory? And I haven't put anything in here in 2 years. It was like 4 gigs of data. Like, what's in this? Like, I don't know what it is.
The other thing to run into as well is that without having some sort of automation built into data classification, people are going to do whatever they need to do to classify that information in a way that allows them to use it in the way they want to use it.
That's true. That's true. That's 100% true.
I remember years ago we were doing a test at a place, and in one of the databases they had the tax ID field, in which if you're a sole proprietor, you know what your tax ID is. It's your social security number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's a tax ID field. It doesn't need to be encrypted. It doesn't need to be, because tax ID is public information. And, like, it was a huge thing, but it just reminds me of that. You're going to classify the data how you want to classify it to get what you need done. And I mean, it was a hard line. Like, nope, that's tax ID. That's not social security number. Like, just reading about, like, I don't know why everybody doesn't just relabel the social security number field then to tax ID, and it would save us a huge headache. But I mean, you'll see people do that, right? I mean, it's like filling out compliance questionnaires. Like, oh yeah, we do secure code review. Bob over there knows something about security, and he does reviews. So, yep, secure code review, we do it. You kind of stress that line a little bit.
Hey Sam, if we're gonna close this out, because somehow we've run in through 35 minutes of time, and we have to eventually stop. What do you what's your sage wisdom in this? We're halfway through 2025. You're at the helm of a very diverse, rather large security program across an incredibly large portfolio, which I both don't envy and slightly want to be you, because that's some cool visibility. What's your advice, man? What are you telling people that, like, what's the advice you want to give, or what do you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I think, and it's said a lot, but focus on the basics, right? Do the basic stuff right first, because if you don't get the basic stuff right first, all the other stuff doesn't matter, right? All the other buzzword bingo card terms that we used over the course of the podcast, and others as well that we haven't talked about, those things are ways. They're the ways that the vendors want you to get you to spend money. But at the same time, if you're not doing the basic stuff right first, and you don't understand how to protect the data that you have to make sure you are protecting every day, like the crown jewels of the organization, if you don't know how to get the basic stuff done right, then it's not going to matter whether you're doing all the other cool whiz bang stuff that we all want to work on, because it's the fun, new, cool technology. But if we're not doing the basics right first, none of that's going to matter, because you're not going to get compromised because you didn't have this whiz bang feature in place. You're going to get compromised because you didn't do the basics right first.
And it comes back, that's good wisdom. And I think in a world that's continuously trying to tell security professionals the next big thing is what you need to do, the last basic thing is really the thing you should be doing. Mm-hmm. And it just reminds me, goes all the way back to my favorite Monty Python skit about the castle that sank into the swamp. You guys remember that one, where he's the singing son? And he says, the old man says, I built a castle, and it was on top of the swamp, so it sank into the swamp. I built another one. That one sank into the swamp. Third one, I built it up, and it burned down, then sank into the swamp. But the fourth one had a strong foundation, right? I feel like it's a strong foundation. We got to. The lesson is strong foundations, and whether you're building a hurricane-proof house or a resistant house, or a program that's going to repel the Iranians, North Koreans, Chinese, Russians, or Mike on spring break. I think the advice is sound. So that's good. Oh man, it's good to be back from break, you guys. I tell you, I'm gone for a week, and it's weird. Like I'm sitting there, and we're enjoying it. I've got no computer with me, and I'm like, I feel like it's Monday night. I feel like I should be doing something. Oh, that's right. I should be editing and posting a show. It just felt wrong. So I don't do this very often, but we're back. Thanks for joining us, Sam, for the back to real life, back to work episode. James, Jim, always good to have you guys on board, folks.
Bad for a show about nothing.
We covered a lot for a show about nothing. I love it. I'm telling you, some of my favorite podcasts have been where somebody goes, "Hey, what are we talking about?" I'm like, I don't know. We're gonna get there. We'll figure it out when we start talking. There's always some interesting topics. So.
For sure.
Good to have you, buddy. Thanks for being here, folks. Thanks for listening. We are back. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, a review. I don't know. Follow, subscribe, do those things so we can reach your friends and continue to grow this audience. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you another time, another place on another Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. We'll see everybody later. Bye-bye.
This is Bella. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave my dad a review and share this with your friends. Bye.